Oklahoma, 1942. If you were to stand on the edge of Highway 20, just west of the town of Pryor Creek, on the afternoon of April 27th, you wouldn't have noticed anything particularly strange about the horizon. Not at first. George Wolfe knew this better than anyone. On this afternoon, George is driving his rig along Highway 20. He is hauling a heavy load, pushing the gears, trying to beat the rain that is threatening to break open the gray slate of the sky. George Wolfe hits the brakes. The air brakes hiss, a sharp, angry sound that cuts through the humidity. He idles the truck. He leans forward against the steering wheel, squinting through the bug-splattered windshield. George would later describe it as a cone, but that word, cone, it feels too geometric, too clean. What George Wolfe saw was a living, breathing entity. He described it as purplish black, not gray, not white, purple, like a deep, angry bruise on the skin of the sky. He watches, mesmerized, as the bottom of this purple cone touches the earth. It doesn't glide, it feeds. He sees objects tumbling through the air, high above the tree line. At first, they look like debris, pieces of barns, sheet metal. George Wolfe sits in his idling truck. He is a man who understands the physics of the road, momentum, weight, gravity. But what he is witnessing is a violation of all those laws. To understand the tragedy of Pryor Creek, you have to understand that this was not a town that was afraid. Quite the opposite. Just a few miles outside of town sat the Oklahoma Ordnance Works. It was a sprawling, massive complex. A factory built for one purpose, to churn out the high explosives that would level cities in Europe and islands in the Pacific. It was a city within a city. The population had exploded. Workers flooded in from Arkansas, Missouri, Texas. Men looking for a paycheck. Women looking to do their part. They packed into boarding houses. They rented spare rooms. They built shacks on the outskirts of town. And this is the normalcy bias. It is the psychological armor that human beings wear when they refuse to believe that the worst can happen. We look around. We see the traffic lights working. We see the grocery store shelves stocked. We hear the jazz music playing on the radio. And our brains tell us, you are safe. The system is working. She looked at the clock. It was getting late in the afternoon. Pop. It felt like she was descending in an airplane or driving down a steep mountain pass. But she was sitting perfectly still at her desk on the ground floor. But Faye didn't panic. Why would she? She looked out the window. It was raining, hard. The sky was dark. But it's Oklahoma in April. It always rains. The radio was on in the corner of the office. It wasn't playing a warning. It wasn't playing a siren. It was playing music. We are about to enter the forensic timeline of this disaster. We are going to break down the minutes that turned a boomtown into a graveyard. If you want to accompany us into the deep history of true disasters, if you want to understand the mechanics of survival, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because what we are about to uncover is not just a weather event. It is a crime scene. There was a genuine fear, bordering on paranoia, that Japanese or German bombers could launch air raids on the American mainland. The Oklahoma Ordnance Works, that massive explosives plant just down the road, that was a prime target. That was a bullseye. It was a document that gagged the weatherman. Under this code, weather forecasting was considered a military secret. Radio stations were strictly forbidden from broadcasting specific details about storm tracks. They couldn't mention wind direction. They couldn't mention barometric pressure, and they certainly couldn't mention the specific location of a storm cell. That information was classified. So, as George Wolfe sat in his truck on the hill, watching the purple cone devour the earth, the radio in Faye Mitchell's office remained blissfully, terrifyingly vague. 3 p.m. The sky begins to change. It loses the gray color of simple rain and begins to curdle. It turns a sickly, bruised yellow. This is the sucker hole, the brief pause in the storm where the sun might even peek through. It's a trick. It draws people out of their homes. It makes them think the worst is over. Not a metaphor. Not a trick of the light. Eyewitnesses, hundreds of them, will later swear under oath that the sky turned the color of a mossy river bottom. a deep, luminous, nauseating green. The people of Pryor are going about their business. They are buying groceries. They are filing papers. They are counting the cash at the First National Bank. He is on South Agnew Street. He is outside. He feels the pressure drop. He sees the green sky. And unlike the radio stations, he is not afraid of the censors. He is sprinting down the center of the muddy street, lungs burning, blowing the whistle with every ounce of breath he has. Tweet, tweet, tweet. And then the sound changes. It is no longer the sound of wind. It is the sound of a freight train, 1,000 freight trains. The sun didn't set. The sun was eaten. Blackness. It isn't night. Night has depth. Night has stars. Night has the promise of a dawn. This is a physical wall of earth, water, and debris. If you have never heard a tornado of this magnitude, your brain tries to categorize it. It reaches for comparisons. A train, that is the cliché. Everyone says it sounds like a freight train, but a train runs on tracks. A train has a rhythm. Clack, 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 clack. A train is a machine made by men, and it follows rules. I am 30. This sound has no rhythm. It is a grinding, chewing, mechanical roar. It is the sound of the planet itself screaming as it is being shredded. It is the sound of millions of trees snapping at once. It is the sound of barns imploding. It is the sound of the atmosphere being sucked through a straw. Faye brings her hands to her ears. She presses hard. The pressure is unbearable. It feels, literally, like her head is being inflated from the inside. The air pressure in the room has dropped so significantly, so instantly, that the fluid in her inner ear is expanding. She isn't just hearing the storm. She is feeling it in her sinuses, in her teeth, in the hollows of her chest, swimming underwater. That is what she will say later. She drops to the floor. She doesn't dive. She collapses. The gravity seems to have shifted. The floor is vibrating, buzzing like a high-tension wire under the desk. She curls into a ball. She pulls her knees to her chest. She covers her head with her arms. It is a primitive instinct, the fetal position. We return to it when we have no other defense. We try to make ourselves small. We try to hide from the predator, but this predator can see through walls. Outside, on South Agnew Street, the whistle man is still running. He is the only moving thing in a frozen world. Cars have stopped. People are standing on sidewalks, paralyzed by the spectacle of the green sky turning black. They are statues. But the whistle man is moving. Tweet, tweet, tweet. He is gasping for air. The wind is now hitting him in gusts, staggering him, pushing him sideways. It feels hot. That's the strange thing. The wind isn't cold. It's hot. It smells like sulfur. It smells like mud. It smells like ozone, that sharp, metallic tang of electricity. He sees the funnel now. It is cresting the hill at the edge of town. It is massive. It is wider than the town itself. It is a grinding wall of debris that extends from the ground to the heavens. He sees houses vanishing into it, not exploding, vanishing. One moment, a white farmhouse. The next, a cloud of gray dust. He blows the whistle again, but he can't hear it. The roar has swallowed the sound. The roar has swallowed everything. He dives. He throws himself into a drainage ditch on the side of the road. The mud is cold. He claws his fingers into the wet earth, trying to anchor himself, trying to become part of the ground. And then, the monster steps onto Main Street. We often talk about destruction in broad strokes. The town was leveled. The building collapsed. But let's slow it down. Let's look at the physics of what happens when wind speeds exceed 200 miles per hour. Let's focus on the First National Bank. It is a fortress. Brick, mortar, stone. It was built to withstand robbers. It was built to withstand time. But it was not built for this. The wind hits the south wall. It doesn't just push. It finds every microscopic crack in the mortar. It finds every loose brick. The air pressure outside the building drops to near vacuum. The air pressure inside the bank is still normal. Physics demands equilibrium. The high pressure inside wants to get out. The wall doesn't blow in. it blows out. In a fraction of a second, the entire facade of the bank shears off. Imagine a zipper being pulled down the front of a dollhouse. The bricks dissolve, the mortar turns to dust. Inside, the tellers are freezing, the cash drawers are open. Suddenly, the barrier between the safety of the bank and the chaos of the storm is gone. The wind enters. It is a thief, but it doesn't want the gold. It wants the paper, thousands of dollar bills, tens of thousands, life savings, payroll for the factory. They are lifted instantly. They don't fly away like birds. They are atomized into a green and white blizzard. The money swirls into the vortex. It mixes with the mud. It mixes with the glass. It mixes with the blood. A $20 bill, crisp and new, is slapped wetly against a telephone pole 3 blocks away. A $10 bill is driven into the bark of an oak tree like a shrapnel shard. People on the street, those who were too slow, those who were mesmerizing by the money, they don't even see it go. They are fighting to stay on their feet. The wind is stripping them. This is a gruesome detail, but we must be accurate. The force of the wind is so intense that it acts like sandpaper. It tears clothes from bodies. It drives dirt into pores. A man grabs a lamppost. He holds on with both hands. His knuckles are white. He is screaming, but there is no sound. The wind pulls at his legs. It pulls at his torso. He is a flag in a hurricane. And then the lamppost bends. Steel, bending like hot wax. Down the street, at the local cafe, there are 5 people. They were drinking coffee. They were talking about the war. They were talking about the factory shift. When the windows blew out, the sound was like a shotgun blast. Crash. Glass shards, millions of them, became missiles. The 5 customers jumped up. They ran for the door. It is the instinct of fire. Run for the exit. But in a tornado, the exit is the mouth of the beast. They made it to the doorway. They were shoulder to shoulder, pushing, panicking, trying to get into the alleyway. The roof of the cafe lifted. It didn't collapse. It lifted. The aerodynamic forces created lift, just like an airplane wing. The entire timber structure, shingles, beams, insulation, rose 10 feet into the air. For a split second, the cafe was open to the sky. The 5 people looked up. They saw the funnel directly above them. The spinning maw of debris, and then the roof came back down. It didn't fall straight. It twisted. It crashed down on the doorway. There was no time for pain, no time for realization. The weight of the structure, combined with the velocity of the collapse, ended 5 lives in a singular, distinct thud. The cafe was gone. In its place, a pile of lumber, a twisted sign, and a silence that was buried under the roar. Out on the highway, where George Wolfe had been watching, the storm is finishing its work on the road. There was another truck, a gasoline transport, a massive machine, steel tank, heavy chassis, 18 wheels, fully loaded. It weighed tens of thousands of pounds. The tornado caught it. It didn't just tip it over. The wind speeds at the center of the vortex are spinning so fast that they create a torque, a twisting force that is almost impossible to comprehend. The truck was lifted off the asphalt. It was suspended in the air, a multi-ton beast floating in the gray void. And then the wind wrung it. Like a wet towel, the steel chassis twisted. The metal groaned and screamed as it was bent beyond its yield point. The tank crumpled. The truck was thrown into a field. When rescuers found it later, they stared at it in silence. They walked around it. They touched the cold metal. It was tied in a knot. It looked like a pretzel. It was a monument to the impossible, a sculpture made by a mad god. How much force does it take to tie a steel truck in a knot? Engineers would calculate it later. They would talk about torque and tensile strength. But the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the image. It was proof that the rules of the world had been suspended. And then, there was the abstract office. This is the story that keeps the meteorologists awake at night. This is the anomaly. The abstract office was a small building where land deeds and titles were kept. Rows and rows of filing cabinets, open shelves, stacks of paper. The tornado hit it directly. The walls were wood and brick. The wind hit the building with such precision, such violent specificity, that the walls simply ceased to exist. They were blown away, splintered into toothpicks, and scattered across the county. The roof was gone, the floor was stripped. But the files? The rescuers found the filing cabinet standing upright. They found the open shelves still standing, and on those shelves were the stacks of paper. Not a single sheet was missing. How? How can a wind that ties a truck into a knot, a wind that strips the bark off of trees, a wind that dissolves brick walls, leave a stack of loose papers undisturbed? It is the mystery of the vortex, the microcurrents, the eye of the storm where, for a millisecond, there is perfect stillness. The abstract office stood there, naked, walls gone, but its bureaucratic soul intact. It was a ghost story written in real time. Back in the county agent's office, Faye Mitchell is still under the desk. The building is coming apart around her. She hears the windows shatter. She hears the ceiling joists crack, a sound like gunshots. Crack, crack, crack! She feels debris hitting her back, plaster, glass, wood. She is screaming, "God, please, God!" But she can't hear her own voice. The roar is inside her head. It is vibrating her skull. She feels a weight pressed down on her. The desk. The heavy oak desk is the only thing between her and oblivion. The ceiling collapses. Tons of debris rain down. The desk groans. It bows, but it holds. Faye is trapped in a coffin of wood and dust. She squeezes her eyes shut. She waits for the end. She waits for the crushing weight to break her spine. She thinks of her family. She thinks of the war. She thinks of the unfinished paperwork on her desk. The mind does strange things in the face of death. It latches on to the trivial. Did I turn off the stove? Did I file the report? The roar intensifies one last time. A crescendo. A scream that seems to tear the fabric of reality. And then it lifts. Just as quickly as it came, the monster pulls its foot off the throat of the town. The funnel rises. It spins back up into the clouds. It takes its debris, its cows, its trees, and it moves on to the east. The rain stops, the wind dies, and suddenly, terrifyingly, there is silence. It is a silence heavier than the roar. It is a silence that rings in the ears. Faye Mitchell opens her eyes. It is dark. She is buried. She coughs. The air is thick with dust. It tastes like chalk. She pushes up against the desk. It doesn't move. She is pinned. She listens. She is waiting for the sound of traffic. She is waiting for the sound of the radio. She is waiting for the sound of normal. But there is only the dripping of water. Drip, drip, drip. A pipe has burst somewhere, and then the first human sound cuts through the gray haze. It isn't a word. It isn't a sentence. It is a scream. It is a high, thin, piercing wail. A mother calling for a child. "Donald! David!" Then another voice, deeper. A man, groaning in pain. "Help me." Then another and another. The silence is broken. The chorus of the dam begins. Faye pushes harder. She has to get out. She has to see. She crawls. She finds a gap in the debris. She scrapes her elbows. She tears her dress. She pushes through a pile of lath and plaster. She emerges. She stands up. She looks around. She blinks, trying to clear the dust from her eyes. She knows where she is. She is in the county agent's office. She knows where the door should be. She knows where the street should be. But she doesn't recognize anything. The office is gone. The building is gone. She looks out at the town of Pryor. There are no landmarks. The bank, gone. The cafe, gone. The hardware store, gone. It looks like a garbage dump. A vast, endless field of splinters and mud. And walking through the mist, like ghosts, are the survivors. They are covered in gray mud. Their clothes are torn. They are bleeding. They are walking aimlessly, stumbling over bricks. Faye looks down at her feet. She sees something in the mud. It is a piece of paper, a check, from the First National Bank. She steps over it, and then she sees the body. The rain returns. It isn't the violent driving rain of the storm. It is a cold, steady, miserable drizzle. It falls on the ruins of Pryor, Oklahoma, like a shroud. It mixes with the dust and the pulverized drywall to create a gray paste that coats everything. Faye Mitchell is standing in what used to be the street. She is shivering. The adrenaline is fading, and the cold is setting in. She looks down at the ground again. It is one of the most surreal images of the 20th century. The street is paved with money. Tens of thousands of dollars. Cash, checks, war bonds. The guts of the First National Bank have been spilled open and scattered across the mud. In 1942, this is a fortune. This is life-changing wealth. But Faye Mitchell steps over it. A man walks past her. He is bleeding from a gash on his forehead. He is holding his arm, which hangs at a wrong angle. He steps on a stack of $20 bills. He pushes them into the mud with his boot. He doesn't even look down. In this moment, the economy has collapsed. Not the national economy, the human economy. The value of a dollar has dropped to zero. The only currency that matters now is breath. The only currency is a heartbeat. Faye begins to walk. She doesn't know where she is going. She is just moving. She passes the ruins of the hardware store. She sees a toaster, perfectly intact, sitting on top of a pile of bricks. She sees a child's doll, face down in a puddle. The silence is gone now. The screams have turned into a low, steady hum of panic. "Over here! I need a hand over here! Has anyone seen my wife? Martha? Martha!" The voices are ghostly in the mist. Faye stumbles. She catches herself on a piece of twisted metal. It's the fender of a car. The car itself is gone. Just the fender remains, wrapped around a tree stump like a metal scarf. She realizes then that the landscape has been flattened. The familiar skyline of her town, the church steeple, the water tower, the bank, is gone. It is a horizontal world now. We must talk about the cost. We can talk about property damage. We can talk about the $2.5 million in losses. But those are just numbers. Statistics are how we distance ourselves from tragedy. We need to look at the specific, the intimate. Let's talk about the Cable family. Mrs. Ruth Cable. She was 29 years old, a mother. She had 2 sons, Donald, who was 8, and David, who was 11. They were at home when the siren didn't sound, when the radio played jazz, when the house began to shake, when the roof was torn off. Ruth did what every mother in history would do. She didn't run for the door. She ran for her children. The rescuers found them hours later. It was a scene that silenced the men who were digging. They weren't scattered. They were together. Ruth was found with her arms locked around her boys. She had used her own body as a shield. She had tried to cover them, to protect them from the collapsing walls, from the flying glass. They were huddled in a corner. But the storm was too strong. The physics were too violent. All 3 of them, Ruth, Donald, and David, were gone. The rescuers stood there in the rain, hats in hands, looking down at this tableau of maternal sacrifice. There was nothing to be done, no first aid to be rendered. They covered them with a tarp, and they moved on, because they had to. Because for every Ruth Cable, there were 10 others who were still alive, buried, waiting. The local police force was decimated. The fire department was buried under its own station. The town of Pryor was effectively leaderless. But help was coming, and it was coming from an unlikely source. 3 miles away, at the Oklahoma Ordnance Works. The storm had missed the factory. The shift whistle blew. But not for a shift change. Thousands of men were working on the assembly lines. They were mixing nitrates. They were packing TNT. They were building the weapons that would destroy Hamburg and Tokyo. But when the news reached the plant, when the word spread that Pryor was gone, the machinery stopped. The plant manager didn't wait for orders from Washington. He didn't wait for permission. He opened the gates. "Go," he said. "Take the trucks, take the ambulances, take the flashlights." And so, an army marched on Pryor. But it wasn't an army of soldiers. It was an army of bomb makers. Imagine the irony. Men who spent their days creating the tools of mass destruction were now racing to save lives from a mass destruction event. They arrived in a convoy of military trucks. They poured out of the vehicles, wearing their factory coveralls, carrying shovels, pickaxes, and crowbars. They were the first organized response. They moved with military precision. They formed lines. They lifted beams that weighed hundreds of pounds. They dug with their bare hands until their fingernails bled. They found Judge W.E. Nicklin, the veteran county official, a man who was a pillar of the community. He was buried under the courthouse ruins. They pulled him out. They laid him on a stretcher, but it was too late. The judge was gone. They found Ina Trout, another name on the list, another life cut short. But they also found the living. They found a baby, crying, unharmed, in a dresser drawer that had been thrown into a tree. They found an old man, sitting in his rocking chair, in a house that had no walls, staring blankly at the rain. The bomb makers worked through the night. They didn't stop to eat. They didn't stop to rest. They were fueled by a desperate need to fix what the wind had broken. The sun sets. But there are no streetlights. The power grid is gone. The telephone poles are snapped like matchsticks. Darkness falls over the ruins. Absolute pitch blackness. The only light comes from the flashlights of the rescuers, sweeping back and forth like fireflies in a graveyard. And with the darkness comes a new fear: looting, chaos, the breakdown of order. Governor Leon Phillips is in Oklahoma City. He gets the call. The reports are fragmented. Total destruction. Hundreds dead. He acts fast. He declares martial law. But the National Guard is gone. The young men of Oklahoma are in uniform. But they are in the Philippines. They are in England. They are training for the invasion of North Africa. So the governor sends what he has: state troopers. They arrive in their cruisers. They set up roadblocks on Highway 20. They issue a simple order: shoot to kill. Any looter found picking through the debris, any ghoul trying to steal a watch from a dead body, will be shot on sight. It is a harsh order, a wartime order. The troopers patrol the perimeter. They stand guard over the bank, where the money is still blowing in the wind. They stand guard over the morgue. The morgue is full. The local funeral homes cannot handle the volume, so they take over a garage, a car dealership. They line the bodies up in rows. They cover them with sheets. Faye Mitchell is there. She isn't dead. She isn't injured badly, but she is looking. She is walking down the rows, lifting the sheets, one by one, looking for friends, looking for neighbors, the smell of wet wool, the smell of gasoline, the smell of death. It is a smell she will never scrub out of her memory. As the night deepens, a terrifying realization settles over the survivors. They are huddled around fires made from the splinters of their own homes. They are wrapped in blankets provided by the Red Cross. They turn on a battery-operated radio. They are waiting for the news. They are waiting for the nation to mourn with them. They are waiting to hear the president speak their town's name. They tune into the national broadcast. They hear news about the Pacific Theater. They hear news about production quotas. They hear a baseball score. But they do not hear a word about Pryor. The rest of the country doesn't know. The censorship is still holding. The Code of Wartime Practices is still in effect. To the outside world, the weather in Oklahoma is a secret. The people of Pryor are alone in the dark. They have been erased, first by the wind, and now by the silence of the state. So, why? Why did 52 people die? Why were 350 injured? Why was a town obliterated without a siren sounding? We must pivot now. We must step out of the mud and into the archives. We need to look at the paper trail. Because this wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a failure of policy. The Code of Wartime Practices. Let's read the text. The actual directive given to the Weather Bureau and the broadcasters. It stated that no weather information could be broadcast that would aid the enemy. It specifically prohibited the mention of wind direction, barometric pressure, or specific storm tracks. The logic was linear. If a German bomber knows there is a storm in Oklahoma, he can use that storm as cover, or he can avoid it to ensure his bombs hit the target. It was a cold calculus. The government decided that the risk of an air raid was greater than the risk of a tornado. But here is the tragedy. The German bombers never came. The Japanese planes never reached Oklahoma. The enemy never attacked. But the weather did. In the weeks following the disaster, the anger began to boil over. The survivors weren't just sad. They were furious. They asked the hard questions. If the weatherman knew, why didn't he tell us? If the army knew the storm was coming, why didn't they sound the alarm? There were investigations. There were town halls. But it was wartime. Criticism of the government was dangerous. It was seen as unpatriotic. So the anger was swallowed. It was buried, just like the victims. But the legacy of Pryor changed the rules. It forced the Weather Bureau to reconsider. They realized that you cannot hide the weather from the people. You cannot classify a thunderstorm slowly, quietly. The restrictions were loosened. The code was amended. The dead of Pryor had paid the price for that amendment. The funeral processions lasted for days. But even as the hearses were driving to the cemetery, the trucks were driving back into town with lumber. Pryor was a boom town, and boom towns don't die. The war machine needed the explosives. The factory needed the workers. So they rebuilt. They didn't wait for federal aid. They didn't wait for sympathy. They cleared the debris. They bulldozed the ruins. Within months, new houses were going up. New shops were opening on Main Street. The First National Bank was rebuilt, stronger. But if you looked closely, you could see the scars. You could see the trees that were missing their tops. You could see the empty lots where families used to live, families that just packed up and left, unable to listen to the wind anymore, and you could see it in the eyes of the people. Whenever a dark cloud formed on the horizon, whenever the sky turned the bruised shade of green, the people of Pryor would stop. The conversation would die. The laughter would stop. They would look up, and they would listen. They weren't listening for rain. They were listening for the roar. And that brings us back to the Whistle Man. We started this story with him, and we will end it with him. We never found his name. I have combed through the archives. I have looked at the police reports. I have read the diaries. He is described simply as a man, or a neighbor. He ran down South Agnew Street when the government was silent. He blew his whistle when the radio played jazz. He didn't have a radar. He didn't have a satellite. He just had eyes, and a set of lungs, and the courage to run toward the danger instead of away from it. How many people did he save? Did the family in the blue house get to the cellar because they heard that shrill tweet, tweet, tweet? Did the mother grab her baby because she saw a man running for his life? We will never know the exact number, but we know this. In the face of the loudest noise on earth, and in the face of the silence of the state, one man made a sound. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a warning. And in 1942, in Pryor, Oklahoma, that simple human sound was the difference between life and death. Nature is indifferent. The tornado does not hate you. It does not want your money. It does not care about your war. It is simply energy, heat, moisture, spin. It is a reminder that we live on a volatile planet. We build our cities. We draw our borders. We write our laws. But we are tenants here. We are guests. And sometimes the landlord comes to collect. The Pryor Creek tornado of 1942 is a story about the failure of systems, the failure of technology, the failure of bureaucracy. But it is also a story about the resilience of the human spirit. It is about Faye Mitchell crawling out of the rubble. It is about the bomb makers becoming rescuers. It is about the community that refused to be erased. So, the next time you hear a siren, the next time your phone buzzes with a weather alert, don't ignore it. Don't be annoyed. Listen to it. Because that sound is a privilege. That sound is a gift. That sound is the ghost of Pryor, Oklahoma, whispering to you. Take cover.